God's story, Esther. So part of God's story is about a woman named Esther, and it goes like this. Esther was adopted by her cousin Mordecai because her parents died. She and Mordecai were Jews, which means they were part of God's special family. Our story begins right before Esther becomes queen and God's family gets in some serious danger. Now, even though Esther was a Jew, she lived in Persia, which was ruled by King Xerxes. Let's just call him X. One night, King X wanted to show off his wife, Queen Vashti, at a party. She said no. So he said Vashti could never see him again, and he needed a new queen. So the king invited all the single ladies in Persia to his palace for a year. He decided Esther was prettiest, and she became queen. Really? But as crazy as that sounds, it was a good choice because Esther saved his life. See, one day, Mordecai overheard two guards plotting to kill the king. So he told Esther, and Esther told X. Around the same time, another powerful man at the palace, Haman, got really mad at Mordecai. He didn't know Mordecai had saved the king's life, or that he was the queen's cousin. So he made a rule that all Jews must die. Like we said, he was really mad. And the king let Haman make this rule because he had no idea that Mordecai or Esther were Jews. Well, all the Jews were heartbroken. But Mordecai thought maybe Esther could save them. She was queen, after all. Problem is, only a king could change laws. And anybody who even spoke to the king when he didn't want to listen could die, including Esther. But she was willing to try. She said, "If I die, I die." Talk about brave. So Esther visited the king. To her relief, he said, "What do you want? I'll give it to you." Esther had a plan. Politely, she invited King X and Haman to dinner. She had saved the king's life. Now she was making a special dinner for him? X liked that. He said yes. That night, the king asked Esther what she wanted again. And again, Esther invited them to dinner. Haman was thrilled to be invited to dine with the king and queen, twice. But even with this special treatment, he knew he couldn't be truly happy until Mordecai was dead. So he came up with a plan to kill him the next day. But that same day, the king realized that Mordecai had never been honored for saving him. So X asked Haman how to honor someone. Haman thought the king was going to honor him. Instead, he honored Mordecai. So Haman was already in a bad mood when he got to dinner. But his day went from bad to worse. See, Esther finally told the king that someone made a law to destroy her people. X was furious and asked, "Who dared to do such a thing?" Esther told him, "It was Haman." Then the king found out that Haman wanted to kill Mordecai too. Enraged, he ordered that Haman be killed. After that, King X told Mordecai to make a new law to save the Jews. The Jews honored Mordecai and celebrated with a feast. Esther had been willing to risk her life for her people, and she ended up saving them. Like Esther, another rescuer would come one day, and he would actually die to save all of God's special family. And that's the story of Esther. So, in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Esther was a Jew. She became queen. Mordecai overheard a plan. He told Esther. Esther told X. Mordecai made Haman mad. Haman made a law. The Jews were sad. Esther was brave. She had a plan. She told the king about Haman. The king got rid of Haman. God's family was saved. And that's a part of God's story.
Esther's story takes place during the years of the Jewish exile, around 470 BC. Now the Jews had been defeated by Babylon, which meant they were exiled from their homeland and taken as slaves. But later, the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians. So now, the Jews found themselves under the rule of the Persian king, Xerxes. That's where our story begins. King Xerxes decided he was going to throw a party. And this wasn't your standard cookies and punch type of party. This party lasted for 7 days and included all manner of lavish feasting and drinking. Now on the last day, the king decided to show off his queen, who was very beautiful. But when he called for her to come to the feast, she refused. This greatly angered the king. And not only the king, but his counselors and noblemen as well. Because they were thinking, if the queen treats the king this way, wives everywhere are going to start disrespecting their husbands. They're going to be mouthing off, refusing to change the baby. They're not going to cook the falafel for dinner. It's going to be chaos. So the king declared that the queen was no longer the queen, which meant that he needed to find a new one. Now, if you're an all-powerful male in the ancient world, what better way to find a new wife than to parade every beautiful single woman in the land through your palace? So that's what he did. Among the hundreds of women sent to the palace was a girl named Esther. Esther was secretly a Jew, and she was also an orphan raised by her uncle Mordecai. And though she was essentially the lowest possible social class, the Lord was with Esther, and she was a beautiful and graceful woman. When she was brought to the palace, she found favor among all the king's staff, and ultimately the king himself, who chose her to be queen. Sometime later, Esther's uncle Mordecai was sitting at the city gate when he overheard 2 men plotting to kill the king. Mordecai quickly relayed this to Esther, who told the king, who promptly solved the problem. Even though he saved the king's life, Mordecai was never recognized for what he did. And sometime later, he found himself in trouble when a man named Haman rose to power. Haman was the king's second in command, and whenever Haman walked through the streets, everyone was ordered to bow down before him. But Mordecai, being a Jew and a follower of God, refused to bow to Haman. When Haman found out about it, he was enraged. In fact, he was so enraged that he plotted to kill not only Mordecai, but every single Jew in the empire, women and children included. By Haman's influence, the king sent out a decree that ordered all Jews to be executed and their property taken. When Mordecai found out about it, he begged Esther to approach the king and ask him to change his mind. But Esther knew that if she were to approach the king without being summoned, she could, by law, be put to death. Esther was in torment, but finally, after much fasting and praying, she decided to approach the king, even if she should perish. When the king saw her standing before him, he loved her and invited her to speak. "What do you wish, Esther?" the king asked. Esther replied, "I would ask that the king and Haman come to a feast that I shall prepare." The king was delighted, as was Haman, and together they feasted. Toward the end of the meal, the king asked Esther, "What is it that you wish? Anything you want will be granted to you, up to half my kingdom." Esther replied, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come to another feast that I will prepare, and there I will answer the king's question." Haman left the palace happy that day, but on his way home, he noticed Mordecai at the gate and was reminded of Mordecai's refusal to bow to him. Haman's mood darkened. He decided to have a gallows built on which Mordecai would be hanged the following day. That night, the king couldn't sleep. So he ordered the book of records to be brought and read to him. When the account of Mordecai's warning of the plot to kill the king was read, the king asked, "What have we done to honor Mordecai for saving my life?" "Nothing, Your Majesty," replied his servant. So the king called for Haman, and when he arrived, the king asked, "What should I do for someone I want to honor?" Haman thought he was thinking of him, and he said, you should put your royal robes on him, and a crown, and let him ride your horse through the streets so that everyone will know that this is the man the king honors." The king thought that was a great idea, and he said, "Perfect! Go and get Mordecai and do exactly what you have just said. In fact, you can be the one to lead the horse around." Soon after this, the day of Queen Esther's feast arrived. After they had finished eating, the king again asked Esther, "What is it that you wish?" "Anything you want will be granted to you, up to half my kingdom." Esther replied, "O king, if it please you, all I ask is that my life and the life of my people be spared. For I am a Jew, and it has been decreed that all Jews in the empire should be annihilated." When he heard this, the king was furious. "Who would do such a thing to my queen?" he shouted. "Haman," replied Esther. "And furthermore, he has built a gallows to hang Mordecai, who once saved the king's life." The king replied, "Then let Haman be hanged on it." And so it was. Haman was executed on the gallows. And a new decree was issued, saving the lives of the Jews. Esther and Mordecai were honored and spent the rest of their days serving the king.
Now it's time for a Bible story. There once lived a young girl named Esther. She lived with her adopted father Mordecai in the city of Susa, and they were secretly Jews. Now at that time, the Jewish people were under the rule of the Persian king Xerxes, who, as it happened, needed a new wife. King Xerxes brought together all the most beautiful girls of the land so they could pick a new wife, and one of these beautiful girls was Esther. These girls went through days and days of beauty treatments, and in time, Esther became favoured by everyone, and she was selected to be queen. Mordecai, Esther's father, would walk around the palace gates hoping to hear from Esther, and on one day, he overheard a plot by two of the king's guards to kill King Xerxes.
Nah, you do it.
Mordecai told Esther what he had heard, and Esther told the king, who dealt with the problem. Even though Mordecai saved the king's life, he never received an award, and the king never knew what he did. And then Mordecai found himself in trouble when a man named Haman rose to power. Haman was second in command to Xerxes and would command all people to bow down to him. But Mordecai wouldn't, as he would only bow down to God. Haman was furious and began plans to kill Mordecai and all the Jews. Haman created a law that all Jews must be killed, even the women and the children. So Mordecai went to Esther and begged her to speak to the king. But she was afraid, for if she visited the king without an invitation, she would be killed. But Esther responded to Mordecai, asking everyone to pray for her, and decided she would approach the king even if it meant death. Esther went to Xerxes, and because he loved her, he asked what it is that she wanted to ask him. She said, "If it pleases you, my lord, you and Haman are invited to a dinner I have prepared." Time came for the meal, and at the end of the meal, the king asked Esther again what she wanted. She replied, "Come with Haman tomorrow to another banquet. Then I will answer your question about what I want." That night, the king couldn't sleep and decided to look through his book of records. He then discovered that it was Mordecai that had saved his life and decided to do something great for him. Haman arrived and the king asked him what would be a way of celebrating such a great man. Now Haman thought the king was talking about himself and suggested that a robe and a horse be provided for this great man to ride on. "Perfect," said the king, and commanded Haman to arrange those things for Mordecai. Haman wasn't pleased. The next day came and it was time for Esther's second dinner feast, and at the end of the meal, King Xerxes yet again asked Esther what it was she wanted. She responded, "If it pleases you, let me live. This is what I ask, and let my people live too, for Haman wishes to kill me and all other Jews." The king was furious and had Haman taken away, removing all his possessions and giving them to Mordecai, giving him the position of second in command.
Ooh, harsh.
The king wrote a new law for God's people, and Esther and Mordecai lived their life serving the king.